All right. So lots of different activities. So these are just some of them. These are all active projects at the moment. These aren't stuff in the past. These aren't stuff that we're working on and moving into in the future. Some of you here are from projects we're looking into supporting with Clowder coming up. So this is a community in its making. And so that's what we're trying to do with this first of these annual Clowder All Paws meetings. So I'm going to bring up the last two presentations, well, the last two sessions we have are basically Luigi Marini, who's going to talk about the roadmap for Clowder in terms of features, and then Dan Katz, who's going to talk about next steps in terms of this collaboration turning into a true open source community. So Luigi, if you want to come up, take the stage.
So while I pull up the slides, I have to say that one of the most exciting things as a software developer is to see what people do with the stuff that you build with them, and what they're going to be doing in the future. So I'm being told to move to the right. All right. Okay. So I have two sessions. So as Kenton mentioned, I have two sections. One is 15 minutes long, and it's Clowder features overview. And future roadmap. It's really short, so I'm going to cannibalize the next section, which is also me, which is supposed to be half an hour, and it's about the community and building the community. And that section is really about, we hope that it's going to be a conversation. So think of it, I have a few slides, but be ready to kind of bring up ideas and all of that related to building this community. And then Katz is really going to drive that in the last half an hour. Okay, so. Every time I get asked, what are the core features of Clowder? What's the elevator spiel? Can you tell me why I should be using this? It's a pretty challenging thing because as you saw today, there's so many applications of it and there's so many very interesting things that people are doing that it's really, really hard to kind of take that and just tell you, okay, here it is. But there are some aspects to the framework that are key. And so as we kind of try to describe this and tell people, hey, this is how you can use it, these are the kind of things that we always kind of bring up. And they should look familiar to everyone in this room. They're very generic, right? So you start with some data, and then you associate some metadata to it. You'll be doing some processing on it, potentially visualizing it, and then sharing it with someone. So what I'm going to do is instead of going and looking at every single thing that Clowder can do in these areas is I'm going to highlight some of the things that I don't think get highlighted enough and they are somewhat unique to Clowder compared to something else in this space. So real quick, data, RawBytes. So they're like, okay, why should I put my data in Clowder? Well, we always emphasize this idea that Clowder, right, as a cluster of cats, is this idea that you run Clowder on your own resources. And one of the things that we're doing, and we did in the architecture of the software, is that we made it very easy to add a backend so that you can store bytes in whatever you need to. So for example, for a lot of our instances, we run files on the file system. Somebody uploaded, goes to the file system. We also built some GridFS, MongoDB, because it's sharded and some people were using it. We actually don't use that a lot in practice. With Syngenta, we've been developing an AWS S3 bucket implementation. So if you want to run Clowder in AWS and save some money, then you'll be able to use this and store the files in S3 buckets. In the past, we did an iRods implementation. And actually, we haven't kept this up to date. So if anyone here wants to kind of take that implementation and kind of go with it, please let us know. There is some code there. So rich metadata. This is one of those areas where we think Clowder excels. And we have heard a lot about extractors. The reason why they're called extractors is because originally it was metadata extractors. You give it some raw bytes, and then it just basically creates metadata attached to these raw bytes. But there's also another aspect to it is that you can, as a user, add metadata to files and data sets. And this means that anyone who has permissions can go in there and just add this rich metadata as a user. And the type of metadata you can add is it's actually pretty flexible. So for example, in the second example here, I'm not going to try to use this, never mind. In the second example here, you see that instead of just being, abstract, blah, some text, we actually have spatial geocode, latitude and longitude. And that's a special type of field where you can start typing, and we talk to Google, we get the lat long or specific, city or whatever, and then we add that to the metadata, right? So those widgets, right, the way a user can be supported can be very flexible. And we can build more of these kind of widgets. They are very unique to the use case, right? The last one is what we've mentioned before, the support for standard vocabularies, because in scientific computing, that's really, really important. So going back, so now switching to extracted metadata. Everybody asks me, okay, well, in my system, I can add metadata, right? This is machine-created metadata. What's unique about Clowder? Well, as you can see in this particular example, this, I believe, so this is the GeoTIFF metadata extractor. You can see that at the top. You give it a GeoTIFF, and then it says, okay, this GeoTIFF has the following bounding box, and here's some GeoJSON for the coordinates and everything else. You can see that this is a hierarchical structure. We use JSON behind the scenes. And you, as the developer of the extractor, can just push whatever JSON you want, and Clowder will take it without being predefined ahead of time. That's a lot of flexibility for a developer of an extractor, because it's just a lot easier to be able to say, well, I want to just store this kind of information. And so Clowder is very open, right, from that point of view. Furthermore, when you upload this information, either as a user or as a machine, you get what you see in the content is that JSON document that I mentioned. But also at the top, we have a lot of provenance information. Who was the agent? In this case, it was an extractor, and the ID of the extractor, when it was created. And then if you look at the top, I really want to try to, OK. All right. If you look at the top, this is the linked data aspect of our documents. And so these are semantics and definitions for what appears down here. Because what does compression really mean? Where compression is actually defined up here in this vocabulary, which we didn't create this vocabulary. This is a vocabulary from W3C. And so, we do this behind the scenes, and it's something very important. And schema.org is kind of along those lines. They do something very, very similar, but it's the industry that is defining what those fields are. So we could use schema.org in this kind of approach. So when you define rich metadata dimension as a user, you can define these fields. What does another user add when they define their own user metadata? And a user can actually add more entries. So what you see here on the left is basically how a user adds more entries, and there's types. And so here they can define new entries. They can do this at the space level. They can do this at the entire instance level. So we're letting the people who work with the data, the researchers, actually define those. And then when another researcher goes in and wants to add something, that's available in the GUI. There is no configuration in the backend. There is no call us because you want a new definition to be added. A lot of this social interaction and kind of self-organization, it's really what Clowder is about. Also, when it comes to metadata, yeah, you can do the basic text kind of queries across all the fields that are stored in data sets and files and all of that, comments. You can do that. I'm not showing you that here, but you can also do queries that are or and all of that on that type of metadata. So even if it wasn't user metadata, even if it was extracted metadata, we have the ability of searching that metadata. So without knowing ahead of time what those fields and entries are going to be. So let's switch now to processing, right? Here's another one. So why is Clowder, so unique? Well, it's not necessarily unique, but we have seen a lot of type of extractors that people have been building in the past, right, and deploying them. We've been trying really hard to make this aspect of Clowder as easy as possible. I don't have a slide on that, but for example, we have something that the team has built, which we call the simple Python extractor. And then I think Rob also created an R extractor, where you take an R script or a Python script, and you don't have to know anything about the infrastructure, and you say this function is what that extractor will be. So when I upload a file of this type, just run this code. And we have had some really good success. Don Harwood from Syngenta wrote some extractors. It has been really, really nice. And this is our effort moving forward, making it as easy as possible to actually create these extractors. Also, when it comes to scalability, this is just a graph of the instances that we maintain at NCSA. So these are not all Clowder instances, just the ones we maintain. And you can see that, for example, in the span of 1 year and a half, we had about 83 million extractions, and the purple is TeraRef. So obviously, with all that data coming in, there's a lot of individual extractions that happen there. But it also emphasizes all the other colors, this kind of long tail of data, this idea that there's all these other projects. They might have less, number of files, but that doesn't mean that, they're not very unique. And so we have a lot of these little ones. All of this is containerized. Everybody talks about containers nowadays. We have had really good luck with Docker. And we run for Brown Dog. We have done some code that is able to look at the queue of requests of, for extraction and actually scale extractors out or, the instances. So if you have a lot of images coming in for one specific type of extraction, it will make a lot of them and then it will scale it down. That was custom code. But more importantly, if you look to the left, we always say, okay, you upload a file and then an extractor run and you get some metadata. But one of the things that we don't highlight is that we actually are listening for a lot more events in Clowder. So we're listening for when a file is uploaded, but also when a file is added to a dataset, file removed from a dataset, metadata added to a file, and so on. You can read the rest. And we can add more. And so what this means is that when something like this, or whatever you want to add to it, happens, there's that message that goes out, and one extractor running in the cloud resource can pick it up and do something with it, right? So you can do much more than just, when a file gets uploaded, you extract some metadata. And we do that. And also, I should mention that the other thing that is not very clear is that you can initiate extraction yourself from the UI. We've been trying to improve that capability. So you go and say, on this dataset, on this file, I want to launch this extractor. And we have some code there to parameterize that, but it's not visible in the UI. It is available from the API. So now we're switching to previewers and visualizations. So this is one of those where I don't think we have seen a lot of those. Well, we have seen some of them throughout today. But one of the things about Clowder is that we always, when we started, and this was something that went back to Medici, when we started that, we were really concerned with this idea of you put all this data in, and then when somebody goes to the site and wants to know what's in the file, do they have to download it and figure out how to visualize it, right? It would be nice if it just showed you on the web page, right? That's pretty typical. And so we build this system so that we have some previewers, and you can see some of them here, so I'll just mention it real quick. So the first one is medical informatics, just a cell that was identified by an extractor in tissue. Second one is a shapefile. Third one, cultural humanities and heritage, is just a 3D object that you can interact with in the browser. I don't think we talked about that one. That was a social science NSF project where they were trying to identify people, specifically in the playground and interactions between them. So you give it a video, and it gives you like a timeline of when people come in and out and where potential interactions happened. These things you can write your own, and we actually don't have a lot of examples of this. So you as the community start thinking about what kind of things would you want to see in the interface, right, when you upload one of these files. And it's not just files. We have this as the dataset level. We have this at the collection level. And so it's one of those things that it would be great to see, kind of leveraged and developed. So here's an example. That thing at the bottom, this is a visualization for a dataset. It's a piece of JavaScript right there at the top with some CSS and a little manifest. And that's what's in the manifest. And basically what this says is basically run this visualization whenever somebody pulls up a data set. And then within the code, which is just plain JavaScript, we go to the API and we say, give me all the MIME types of all the files in this data set. And then we make it very simple D3 visualization. So just an example, but it's not that difficult, right? So think of what can you basically develop, what kind of previewers you can develop. Last but not least, this idea of sharing and publishing. So I've mentioned publishing to HydroShare. So there's a couple things. So the bottom one, I guess, is there's a couple things here. Let's start with, there's a lot of configuration flags in Clowder. And so a lot of people go, well, can I do X? My instance of Clowder can't do X. Well, actually, there's some things that are not enabled by default. And so we're working on documentation. I'll mention this. But we're cleaning that up so to make it more obvious what's available and not when you kind of create an instance. But also one of those is this idea of publishing. So for example, most instances don't show this, but you can do this if you enable it. And this is something that we developed for the NSF seed project. And so that's available, right? That's something that you can turn on. Furthermore, you can have this even more advanced. This is a staging area that we developed for the seed project. When you take data in Clowder, which could be all sorts of data, there's all this data coming from sensors. Well, eventually you'll take a subset and you want to put it on a long-term repository. Maybe your library manages that repository. And so that idea is, okay, well then I have to take that and publish it and basically fulfill the requirements of the long-term repositories. We are discussing how to kind of bring this to the next level in the future and also make it available to other projects. So anyways, so these are kind of the main aspects when it comes to core features. So I've tried to just emphasize some of the things that people don't usually talk about. So let's take like 5 minutes maybe for questions, if there is any questions, and then we'll move on to the next section. Yes, please.
I think sharing is I mean, for me, one of the biggest challenges is publishing the data or sharing the data with public and internal. And I think Dan also mentioned this is the workflow of making it publishable,
Yep.
right? Someone who can go and sign up on those documents, say, yes,
Yeah.
I agree that this can be published. I mean, have you
Yeah.
thinking about that kind of a workflow?
Yeah, and the staging area does some of that. And the gentleman next to you, Jim Myers, can tell you more because he's was one of the PIs on that project. Yeah. So yes, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff there. I'll also mention it in future things that we're going to work on in the next section, something related to this. Yes.
I have a question about, or maybe it's more like a general observation, right? Like I've seen a thread in a lot of talks today that a lot of it is sort of open data community. They come together, they decide that there's going to be a data standard. So there's a schema,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And then so they take that template and you write the schema on Clowder, and then everybody, they're very good citizens. They upload their data, it follows this format, right?
Yep.
The problem that I work with is a little bit different because there's a lot of like private data formats, and each company that makes these detectors, they tag their data slightly differently. So if I'm thinking about a microscope, so somebody might say this is a horizontal field of view, but somebody else might say no, we call it pixel size times something else, right? Or
Mhm.
another one would be like so there's some vocabulary differences. So that's one thing. It's not quite open. So a lot of times, as a standards organization, we're kind of like left to imagine what these people mean,
Mhm.
and so we kind of like build our own schema,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But then on top of that, it's also changing, right? Because technology is changing, and there are new things that have to be integrated with it over time, and so we find that like our schema is also changing rather rapidly.
Mhm.
So do you have some insights on how do you cope with, because what I'm ultimately getting at is if your schema is evolving very rapidly, and at the end of the day you want to be able to tag all of your data so that they can be like machine searchable and learnable and all of this other great
Mhm.
stuff, right? There should be some consistency, and if it's changing so rapidly, like how do I reconcile that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would take a long time. I think we should get into it as kind of one of those topics that there's a lot of people that do a lot of different things in this area. So there's a couple of things. So the CZO one that I mentioned, and I went really quick with Praveen Kumar, the semantic annotation stuff that we were doing there is basically you'll have this service of mappings, and then that evolves over time. And then when you upload something, the Extractors looks this up. And so what ends up in the metadata on that file or data set is not necessarily what was inside the file, but it's driven by whatever is in that semantic service. And so you kind of can curate those mappings, and you can do that kind of mapping there, and then hopefully you have in the output something that's consistent across all these files. That's one thing. The other thing is that these extractors, when it comes to like annotating a file, that's one of the ways that that they really shine. Because as you go along, you can have different versions of the extractors that kind of you update as new versions of your final kind of terms and mappings, right, are going to be at. And so that's another way, because they can all run on the file and they can all annotate it. And so you could have multiple entries of annotations on one file based on multiple understanding of what's within that file. And then it's on the back end, well, it's at the search time that you kind of are dealing with both. But if you're searching for one term, and that's in one of the entries in the metadata, then you'll get the file. And then you'll see the two entries, and then you as the expert will be able to say, well, for me, this is what makes sense. But it's such a big challenge, and all this semantic annotation kind of stuff is something that we definitely should have plenty of discussions about moving forward. Yes?
Just a quick touch on that one. One of the new features that is in Clowder is this notion of extractors per space. So you can have multiple extractors to extract the metadata from it, one for each of the specific cameras you have. And so the moment you create a space, you can say all the images from camera X go into this space, and you can say I have a specific extractor for that camera and associated with that space. So any new image that's uploaded will have that one specific extractor running on the data and extract just that specific information for that camera. So you can do leverage on that capability now as well.
Associate to a device rather than to a metadata.
You associate, so you upload the images into a specific space into Clowder, and then you have an extractor that's associated with that space. And so now all images uploaded to that space will only be handled by that one specific extractor for that one camera model.
Yeah.
So that way you can have a nice way of saying, this space is for images taken by this camera model, this space is for images taken by this camera model, and each of those spaces will have a specific extractor running just for that one camera model.
So for the sake of time, I think we should move on, but now I feel bad, so please, last question.
It's pretty much a yes or no answer. So, is anyone in the Clowder community currently using artificial intelligence to detect patterns and trends in data? If you get these big data sets, instead of having a human going through it, we have the machines doing it for us?
On the metadata extracted?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. That's a great idea. Yeah.
I mean, we've done trends in medical data, subject data, stuff like that, find an anomaly,
Right.
things like that.
Because then we can have the machines really help us identify areas of new research questions and hypotheses.
And I don't know about the social media side too, for that.
Yeah.
Please
Thank
also
you.
remember, if you have questions and you can't ask them here, go to the Google Doc and put
Right.
it in there, and we will make sure to get them answered and distributed to everyone.
Yes, Steve.
Along with what Rob said,
Yep.
are there plans to be able to create workflows so that you can say for this particular space, run this extractor, maybe run this other extractor, and don't run these?
TerraRef does this. They have all sort of experience doing that,
Okay.
and they're also working on kind of moving that forward. So that would be a great conversation to have with that team.
Is that
Yeah.
command line stuff or a front-end GUI that controls that?
It's extractors calling extractors. Inception. I'll leave it at that, and then you can talk to them. Okay, so roadmap. So I just realized we don't really have a lot of time. So roadmap, a couple of comments. One is we've gotten a lot better at releases. We have a really nice workflow. And so you can see that, in the last year, we have more regular releases. We're going to work towards that. And the way we do releases is that we're such a distributed team that we really just basically ask anyone to say, when are you going to have this? And we're pretty flexible. And then, we're pretty strict about what version number it is, if it's backward compatible or not, and all of that. So we're going to keep doing that moving forward. So that being said, I'm going to quickly move through and then just highlight really fast, because we don't have time, things that are in the works or planned. So these are things that we're planning on doing or we already started. And then some ideas of future things, just to give you some ideas of what we could be doing that we don't have anyone kind of working on. So first and foremost, every slide set needs an ExKCD little comic. Clowder was built this way, very organically. Code fast, right? And get things done and support use cases. We didn't have this. We have had this on other projects. But the funny thing is that how do you get to good code? Well, neither one really kind of does that for you. So that's kind of the joke. But what that means in practice for Clowder is that no, we're not going to do another rewrite, but we do have to do a pretty big upgrading of the core libraries. And so that's going to be part of this NSF CSSI project. And we're going to work on this. And what's going to happen, I'm not going to go into the details, but there's going to be some things that are going to be rewritten. And some features might fall off for the sake of getting something up and going. But the quality of the code base and the version of the underlying libraries will go up, which is really important right now because we spend a lot of time trying to debug things in libraries that are just not being supported anymore. So we can't keep doing that moving forward. Better documentation. We actually did have Swagger documentation. This is live. You can go and look at it. We took it away from the main website, and now we're putting it back because it wasn't great. We started cleaning it. I just saw Rob write some documentation right now. So we encourage everyone to actually go there, check it out, write it. This is pretty straightforward. This is what all Python documentation is written in. It's fairly easy to work. We would love to get contributions to the documentation. Federated search. This is another one of those things that we put in the CSSI proposal. We always get this idea, and the CZO use case with Praveen Kumar is driving this, but also the foreseed case with Clara has brought this up. And this is this idea that if I have a lot of Clowder instances in a lot of different places, how, when I search, would it be a way to actually tell me, hey, by the way, there's relevant data somewhere else? Go. We have some ideas on how to do that and actually implement that, and we're going to be doing it. Permission group of spaces. This is something that Todd is working on for foreseed. A lot of people in the past using Clowder have been like, well, every project space, I need to add users and define their roles. But if I have a lot of project spaces that I have the same group of users, it's really, really tedious. We have seen that in IML-CDO, for example. So Todd, for foreseed, has been working on, and is actively working on this idea of you create a group, and then you say, okay, this group has access to the following spaces with this role, and then all of that becomes a lot easier. Links and relations. This is another thing. We actually, behind the scenes, you can do this. You can take any resource, file, dataset, collection, sensors in Clowder, and you can make a link and type it to any other file, collection, dataset, blah, blah, blah. That's only available through the API right now. There is no UI for it. This is some work that we're currently doing to show it on the UI and ideally, eventually, allow the users to do that from the UI. You can see why this would be helpful, I hope. Not extractors. So we call them extractors, but really in practice, we have been using them as more than metadata extractors. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is we're typing them. Each extractor will have a type, and that way in the UI, we can show that extractor, or we can use that extractor, whatever it's going to be called, please come up with a name, that basically, so that it only shows up in the right places, it only gets triggered for the right needs. And we're looking at this, also extending it for things like archival things. This is something that both TerraRef and Syngenta are really pushing. Conversions, if you know Brown Dog and Polyglot. Workflows, there is something there for that, and so on. Docker stacks. This is something that we have. Rob worked really hard on making basically the entire stack, extractors, RabbitMQ, everything else, a Docker stack. We actually don't use this in production, but it's there. We're testing it, and we would love for this to be the default way of actually deploying a Clowder instance. Transformation catalogs. You saw all these extractors you guys are developing. Well, wouldn't it be nice if there was one place where I could search for them? I always get this question, what extractors are available, right? For Brown Dog, we're building this App Store type interface. And so it's really, ideally, you're just pushing the metadata. You can keep the code in your GitHub repository. You can manage the Docker Hub image. But at least there's a place where you can go and search and be like, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me go ahead and use it. File versioning, yes. So if you're familiar with Clowder, if you want to do file versioning right now, you literally have to have multiple files in a data set. This is ridiculous, so we're going to fix it. OK, so who wants to work on this? Faceted search. This came up in the past. You do this great search, you get a lot of results. Well, how do I filter that? Well, we're using Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is actually pretty good at implementing this. We just got to do it. Somebody can maybe pick this up. related data sets, files, and collections. If I'm looking at this data set, why don't you tell me about relevant ones, right? Not just the ones in the same data set. This kind of recommender system, well understood. We have a lot of metadata. Somebody just needs to kind of test things out and implement some simple algorithm to see how far we can take it. Ability to share individual data sets with other users. This comes up all the time. Right now, you have to create a project space, and then you have to assign users to it. That's kind of like an extra step where we don't think is necessary. Wouldn't it be nice if you can take a data set and just share it with the following users, right? Basic stuff. Some of this stuff is pretty, not groundbreaking, but from people using it, it has been an issue. We have Docker, but we don't have Kubernetes Helm charts and template support. If you're familiar with Kubernetes, we have a lot of Kubernetes clusters that we access to when we deploy this. So we want to actually support in the core just recipes out of the box. And many more. I'm not going to go into them, but you can read them real quick. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of other requests. We've seen some of them. Please put them in the Google Doc and get involved with the community. I'm not going to take questions because we don't have time. I'm going to move to the next section, which is the community building. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do community kind of sharing right now. And then I'm going to let Dan Katz kind of drive the conversation in terms of moving forward, how we want to broaden the community, build the community, right? What do we want to do? So we need contributors. So we love contributors, and we've been getting a lot of contributions over time, and this is great, and this has been amazing, and I have a list of contributors that I'm going to show you in a second. But how do you contribute? Most of the time we talk about contributing to core. We are a software developer. We just focus on that because that's our day job. But that's actually not the only way you can contribute to Clowder. Some of you have been writing extractors, right? So that's one way of contributing, right? You can just write an extractor. You don't have to know about the core. Just write the extractor and share with the community. Previewers. Not a lot of people write previewers. Please write previewers. New clients. A lot of people are developing client, right? And if other people know about that, not only will drive their development, but it will make it for you possible to have a free client. So we saw the one with the Unity client. Todd for Foreseed is, mentioned the Flutter mobile app. Like, these are all really cool things. You can just develop a client. There's some clients internal at Syngenta that they're developing. Contribute to the documentation, right? Like Rob was just doing. Contribute designs to improve the interface, right? Somebody mentioned, I think it was Dan, like the UI could be better. And, we're all ears. Come up with a design. Get a designer on the team. Tell us what you would like to see, right? Give us some information. Even if you don't end up implementing it, knowing that, having that information really helps us. And ideas for new features, right? Maybe you just have this great idea. Maybe, you have suggestions. Please do that. So not just software developers, right? The community is not just software developers. So that being said, we're really thankful. This is the contributors to the core, not everything around it like extractors. And some of these are students, full-time people, and so on. We have some committers, and we're really excited. So most of you probably have talked to Rob or myself at some point in time. So in the core, we have to be very careful what goes and it actually gets released and how it's written, because we got to keep this thing going forward and we can't go insane. And so we're slowly adding people to it, and our latest addition is Max Burnett. So everybody, if you have a question about the core code base, just go to Max. Don't go to Rob and Luigi, just go to Max, okay? Next, new thing we want to do for the CSSI, we want to build a steering committee. Big picture strategy, funding and sustainability, networking and dissemination. A lot of you are leaders in your fields, right? We need you to go out there and kind of spread the word, gather requirements, talk to everyone, bring that up. So to do that, we're going to be creating the steering committee. So if you're interested in that, talk to Kent. All right, new feature proposals. So how do we do all of this? Right now, the way we have been doing it is that we have a wiki where we have two things. We have proposal for new features and design documents. You go there, okay, first of all, go to Slack, go to the email, ask if somebody's working on this. Then when you get some feedback, go to the wiki, create a document, share it with everyone, get feedback on the document. Once it's approved and everybody has had a conversation about it, somebody's gonna implement it. How are they gonna implement it? There's gonna be a design document, right? So this is what we currently have. Might not be perfect, it's still in the works, there's some rough edges, but we have something in place, so let's work with it and let's improve it. Slack and mailing list. We have a Clowder Slack. I get all the time like direct messages, and I'm like, please, 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 like ask in the general channel, ask in the developers. And everybody goes, yeah, but I don't know what they're gonna tell me, and I'm not really sure about all of this, blah, blah, blah. But we need your help to make these places actually active and interesting. And we have a general channel that is for general conversation, not developer conversation. And then we have a channel for developer conversation. So help us make these active spaces. You don't like Slack, you don't use Slack, there is a mailing list. Please send to the mailing list. You don't like email, call us, send us an email. Just whatever, just please let us know what your thoughts are. Finally, there's two things we're gonna start doing. We're gonna start doing a monthly webinar. It'll be online, that's the Zoom link at the bottom. It'll be user-facing, so this is not for developers. It'll be discussion of new or existing features, user-facing. If you have topics, let us know. Let's sign up. We're gonna start probably with for the first one next month. You see at the bottom the new extraction bus, simple Python R extractors. That's what we think might be but if you have a better one, please let us know. So every month, at that time, at that URL, hopefully there will be a webinar. And we'll be talking about, kind of new fun things, and you will be able to present there, right? It's not like me talking, to the community. It's you guys talking to you guys and everyone else. Also, the second, third, and fourth Friday of the month will be developer meetings. Same address, but these are developer focused. We do this right now internally, but we want to open it up to any developer for Clowder. We want anyone to be able to come together at this virtual address and just chat. And also John mentioned, hey, have you considered Slack office hours? This is something we're talking about, is like we have Slack and sometimes people don't reply right away. But if we said, hey, every Monday afternoon a bunch of people are going to be online, then maybe, who knows, that might be more effective. All right, finally. The code itself, we have a new GitHub organization. It's not under NCSA anymore for many reasons. One of them is that we have a lot of Git repositories, and we didn't want to overcrowd this, but we also want everyone to feel part of this. So we made a Clowder framework organization, and we're starting to push a lot more repositories to it. Right now here, you just find the core. But over here, we have like 20 plus repositories. And so we hope to put those 20 in, we're gonna put those 20 in there. And I know that you guys have repositories on GitHub in other organizations and everything else. Maybe you can put them here as well, right? We have a new URL. So that was the old one. This still works and will keep working, but we also have a more generic one that points to that. Please share this URL with as many people as possible whenever you talk about Clowder, right? We want people to kind of do this. And that's it. And instead of taking questions, I'm gonna let Dan Katz basically lead the conversation for the next 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Luigi.